don't know about you, but I like to be outside. I like to do long walks in the countryside, but during the winter months I feel less inclined to do so. I prefer to take a walk around the local park. During a recent walk around the park, I was inspired to draw an autumn scene and brought a few treasures back with me from the park. There's several challenges or goals I want to give myself. One is to add a very simple figure drawing to a landscape painting. Another is to use a limited palette of colours, and I want to explore the idea of counter change. I'll explain more about this later in the video. But first, let's take back what I found in the park and swatch some colours. I'm going to use watercolours and then combine them with coloured pencils later. I'm thinking I want to find colours that are purple, yellows, reds, browns, the typical colours of autumn. I want to try out a different way of doing this. I usually swatch the colours by eye. I thought I'd draw a grid to help me place it on the page and also make more room to create more swatches. I've chosen 5 yellows to mix with dioxazine violet. And the yellows I've chosen are lemon yellow, Turner's yellow, cadmium yellow, raw sienna and quinacridone gold. So each of the yellows gets mixed with the violet, and here's the end result. I'm quite surprised actually, the last row came up with some beautiful russet brown colours. After changing the water and cleaning out the palette, I'm going to swatch Perylene Maroon with the same yellows I mentioned earlier. And you can see that the colour range is much more orange and red. After mixing those swatches, I'm going to clean the water and clean out the palette. And this time, I'm going to mix the yellows with carmine red. As I swatch each colour, I add a bit more of the red. And this is when I noticed that the red was completely overpowering some of the yellows. And I also dropped the brush onto a previous painting. So the moral of the story is make sure you cover any paintings before you do these swatches, because red is very difficult to remove. And underneath the swatches I made some notes. I find this really useful for future reference. This was a new way of swatching colours for me, but I think I prefer the way I did it previously, where the colours are more spread out, because I did find that one swatch ran into the next swatch and the colours towards the end looked very similar. Here's a previous swatch of greens and reds, and I think I prefer swatching like this. Another swatching technique that I find really useful is to layer the watercolours on top of each other. So once I've chosen the final colours I'm going to use, I'll paint layers of watercolour, let it dry, and then paint another layer on top and see what that looks like. So here's a couple of examples. I then went into my coloured pencil box and took out some reds, purples, yellows to see what the coloured pencil would look like on top of the watercolours. You will notice that some of them are very small now, so I've bought this pencil extender to help. These pencils are really old and I don't even think you can buy some of them anymore. So I'm not going to go through the colours because I don't think they're actually available anymore, but this is a gorgeous violet colour. These pencils are known as Charisma pencils, and this brand is no longer being manufactured. I suggest if you're going to do swatches like this that you just use what you have. I was surprised how well the coloured pencils looked over the top of the watercolour. They were very vibrant, but not completely opaque, which is the look that I was going for. The next thing I want to try out is a pencil I've not really used before. It's a Derwent sketching pencil and it's described as a dark wash. I'm going to use it with this Tombow eraser that looks a little bit like a pen, but it's actually an eraser. And you can pick out highlights with this eraser. I'm going to draw one of the leaves 100% life size. It's quite useful to note the pattern of the leaf and how the veins radiate out from the middle. When I work out the pattern, it makes it a lot easier to draw. I'm then going to shade in the leaf and use the eraser to add highlights. What's great about this particular pencil is that you can add water to it and make it into a wash. I had a lot of fun experimenting with it, and this is something I like to do with my art supplies, especially ones I've had in my kit for a long time and I've not really used. I like to work out a composition before I do a final painting. It makes things a lot easier just to sketch things out first. I decided to use this scene in the park, and there were two ideas that I wanted to try. One was the idea of counter change, and the other was adding a small figure to the landscape. For this sketch, I'm going to use this ink pen and I'm going to use a water brush to add in a wash. This is a very quick way of making a sketch and working out the composition. As you can tell, I like to try out different materials just to experiment with different looks. I had the idea that I wanted to have the leaves in the foreground full size, and then I wanted to create a background to the leaves so they weren't just a random selection of leaves on a page. I want to create a background that adds a story or a context to the study of autumn leaves. I don't just want to paint random leaves all over the page. One of the ideas I had was to add myself in the background as a simple figure. I want to try out a technique I found in the book Painting Figures and Animals with Confidence by Margaret Evans, and in it she describes how to draw this very simple figure. Start by drawing a line, divide the line in half and then into quarters, and divide the top quarter in half to give 2/8. Draw the head in the top eighth. Below it, make a horizontal line for the shoulders and then block in the body, the arms and the legs. So basically you're creating a stick figure and then blocking in the clothes. If you're just adding a simple figure in the background, then this works perfectly, and it's a lot easier than worrying about figure drawing. I practiced first on a spare piece of paper, and then I tried again on my composition drawing. In the book, she also talks about counterchange. In very simple terms, counterchange is creating a background that contrasts with the subject. This can be done through colour or it can be done through tone. I decided to make the trees and the figure look like a silhouette against a very light sky. And I also used vibrant colours for the leaves at the front to make them project more. And I thought I would try this in my final painting in my sketchbook. You can also try this the other way round, where the subject is light and the sky is dark behind it. I see my sketchbook as a place to experiment, to try out different theories I may have read in books, to try out things that I may have learnt on a course, and not to worry too much about the end result. I added an outline in watercolour of the trees. I chose the actual leaves I was going to paint and arranged them at the front. And I decided to concentrate on painting the leaves which were going to appear in the foreground. I looked at my swatches and picked out some of the favourite colours, and I left highlights for the veins and built up the layers until I was happy with the final result. I used the leaves I'd collected and photographs of the park as reference material. To create an impression of leaves, I've used a sponge. And I also used different variety of leaves to add interest to the foreground. At this stage, I limited the colours to yellows, browns, oranges, reds, and I wanted to make each leaf at the front a different colour and a different shape. I had a lot of fun adding in the leaves. When it got to this point, I did feel that the foreground wasn't really linking very well with the background, and I added in more colours in the trees. I added in more leaves and brought them to the front. I wasn't sure whether I still wanted to add in the simple figure, but I thought I'd give it a go just to try it out. I did like the trees just as they were, but as I'd already had this idea, I thought why not just give it a go and try and add in this simple figure. This is something I'd like to add to my paintings, and it's a case of practicing a bit more and just doing it and adding them in. I quite like the idea of making the figure really simple, almost like a matchstick person. And I like the idea of having figures in the background. I used the Derwent wash pencil and I added some water with a brush just to add it in as a wash. This wasn't in my original plan, but I thought I'd try out adding green around all the leaves and the figures just to see if it would unify the foreground with the background. So I added in this green, but then I thought it was just too muddy and it didn't have the initial vibrancy that I wanted in this painting. I see my sketchbook as a place to experiment, and sometimes my plans can change halfway through, but I did bring it back to the limited palette of colours I'd already chosen with the coloured pencils. I think what was missing from this painting was texture. The ground was just too smooth, and in the park the ground was quite textured. It had grass, it had a lot of leaves, and I wanted to create this feel. The best way I thought of doing this was to use the coloured pencils and give it this texture. I could also add more colour to the leaves on the trees. So I kept going with adding yellows, purples, reds using the coloured pencils. I really like the idea of experimenting in my sketchbook and not sticking too rigidly to what I've already decided to do. I even tried the eraser to add in some texture. And at this point I thought I'd go back in with the sponge and add some texture using that. And I also thought I'd add in some more shadows coming from the figure and the trees. In the end, I felt like the coloured pencil brought it all together, adding in texture, adding in a unified colour, and I really enjoyed this part of the painting. I'm going to show the final results next, so let me know what you think.